Hello and welcome to the Texas Public Policy Foundation's weekly broadcast of the most pressing policy issue facing us this week. I'm Kevin Roberts. I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of the foundation, where each week we take a deep dive into that pressing issue. This week, it's something that unfortunately has not gotten the attention recently of the mainstream media. They're focused on things, it seems, that are relatively unimportant, or at least skewed in such a way that are unhelpful. But what we're going to do today is spend the next 60 minutes setting the table, if you will, about a specific aspect of illegal immigration and of immigration generally, and that's human trafficking. Here in Texas, although I'm joined by two friends who are not based here in Texas, we know that the problem of human trafficking is severe. It is one that really does affect all the aspects of immigration policy, and for our law enforcement officials at the sidewalk level, so to speak, everything that they do regarding immigration. And so it is a pleasure, although it's a difficult topic to talk about, to introduce our three guests. I'm joined by two of my Texas Public Policy Foundation colleagues. First, Nikki Pressley, who is one of our policy analysts here. She works on a number of issues, ranging from this one, immigration, to foster care reform, and even does some work on criminal justice reform. Our colleague in Washington, D.C., Ken Oliver, is our Senior Director of Engagement with Right on Immigration, our national effort to tell the truth about immigration policy, and most importantly, as we'll discuss today, develop some solutions for immigration here in the United States. And our very good friend with whom we're able to do a lot of work in the last couple of years, a great American patriot, I should say, too, Mr. Tom Homan, who's the former acting director of Immigrations and Custom Enforcement, himself a veteran law enforcement officer, former Border Patrol agent himself. It is great to have Ken and Nikki and Tom with us. Thank you all so much for making time for this. And Tom, we're going to jump right in with that proverbial 30,000 foot picture question. And you've obviously spent the better part of your adult life dealing with law enforcement, most recently with immigration, specifically illegal immigration. Before we get into the specific issue of human trafficking, I'm curious if you would, for our audience members, just frame the progress that the current administration has made in fighting illegal immigration, maybe even walk us through some of the high-level numbers so that we understand the context in which human trafficking exists.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me. Look, it's a fact that the Trump administration has made unprecedented success on our southern border. I started in 1984 as Border Patrol agent. I spent my whole career on immigration, specifically southern border. And I've worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. I respect every president I ever worked for because they were my president, elected by American people. But the fact is, no one's done more than President Trump to secure the border and get the illegal immigration numbers down. And as a fact, if you look at the current data on the border, in the past 6 to 10 months, illegal immigration is down anywhere between 60% to 84%, depending on what month you look at. That is unprecedented, considering that the president has done this on his own with the men and women of the Border Patrol and ICE. Congress hasn't helped him one bit, not once. They haven't fixed any loopholes causing illegal immigration. They haven't tried to give him, they've been fighting every dollar on the border wall. They've been fighting policy. The courts haven't helped the Trump administration at all. He's done this on his own because he's made unprecedented decisions by having agreements with Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, agreements no other president has been able to achieve, that they would also help stem the flow of illegal immigration. He has an agreement with Mexico, even though it's on the heels of a threat for tariffs, for Mexico to finally enforce their immigration laws. Do you know it's illegal in the country of Mexico to traffic in women and children? Well, they ever prosecute cases down there, but now they're taking it serious. They got military on the southern border, military on the northern border. They've accepted the Remain in Mexico program, the Migrant Protection Protocol, where thousands and thousands of Central Americans will wait in Mexico until their hearing is scheduled for their asylum claims. So all the success, plus building the wall. He's got now nearly 400 miles of wall built that people said he wouldn't build. And here's where we're at right now. And this is what scares me. I did an op-ed on Fox News. I've been doing a lot of interviews on this. What scares me right now is what I call the Biden effect. In my 34 years doing the job, every time we talk about amnesty, Every time we talk about DACA, and for instance, DACA, when DACA was, created in FY12, what happened in FY13, 14, 15? Hundreds of thousands of family units came to this country illegally. 70% all illegal entries were family units. Why? Why were women bringing their children here? Because they want to be the next DACA population. Every time this country rewards illegal behavior, it's just going to increase bad behavior on the border. And DACA is one clear example. But the president made unprecedented steps. But last 2 months actually, illegal crossings on the border, attempted illegal crossings on the border are up over 40% from the previous month. Now I say attempted because most of them are turned around, sent back to Mexico because of Title 42 COVID decision the president made, which I thought was a great decision, by the way. I was asked about this the other day. There's people from the administration saying this is xenophobic. This is all about immigration. It's not about protecting people from COVID. That's a bunch of crap. Border Patrol's already arrested over 100 people trying to enter the country with COVID, tested positive. And if you're going to stop air travel from China and Europe because of COVID, why would you not try to shut down the southern border where people from 148 different countries crossed illegally last year? Thousands from China. It only makes sense what he did. But here's the problem. 40% attempted illegal entry because the Biden effect is already clear. The cartels, the intelligence reports I'm seeing, the cartels are already gearing up for a Biden presidency. People are already saving their money to make a trip to the United States. Just yesterday, they got 2 boats full of Haitians coming in and they're being held off the shores of Palm Beach. Why is this happening all of a sudden? Because they watch the news too. The cartels watch the news. Biden's leading by double digits. He's going to be the next president. And based on Biden's own statements, based on his website, he said several things that should concern all of us that want secure borders. One, he's going to put a moratorium on all deportations, day one. And when he does decide to start doing deportations again, it's only be for those illegal aliens that were convicted of a serious felony. He said he's going to give free health care to illegal aliens. He's going to end ICE detention, private detention facilities, which basically detain over 80% of ICE's detained population. So what Joe Biden did is send a message to the rest of the world: it's okay to enter this country legally. It's okay to displace an American worker because you won't be detained and you won't be deported. So who would not want to come to the greatest country on earth if they know they won't be detained, they won't be deported? As long as you don't commit a significant felony, and even that has a pass because all the sanctuary cities, you can be convicted of that felony, but the jail or the state system won't cooperate ICE, so you'll be hitting the street anyways. So it's really a free-for-all. So numbers are already showing what would happen under Biden's presidency. And as you said in your opening comments, that a lot of people aren't talking about human trafficking. I'm going to say this: a lot of people aren't talking about illegal immigration right now. The biggest difference between the two candidates is immigration. We have a president that will secure the border, has secured the border greatly at 80%, and another president who I've said this 1,000 times, I get hate from the left for it, but if Biden becomes president, we lose the border. You don't have to be a border expert to realize what his promises will mean to illegal entry into the United States. And look, when we're out of control on the border, like we were with family units, when 50 to 60% of border patrol is no longer on the line because they're changing diapers and making formula, when they're making hospital runs, when the border's out of control, it's vulnerable to criminals, it's vulnerable to illegal drugs, and it's vulnerable to terrorism. And for those people who say you can't prove terrorists come across the border, I say wrong. I've detained known suspected terrorists when I was ICE director. If you want to come and do this country harm, you can't get a plane ticket anymore because of database checks and the background checks done. You can't get a visa because of visa security program and all the database checks and derogatory information run down. You're going to come the same way 20 million others did to a porous southwest border when it's hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens coming across because promises have been made, enticements has been made that there will be no consequence, no deterrence. So that's where we're at. So this election in a couple of weeks, ladies and gentlemen, is the most important election of my lifetime. I know I'm being political, but as a border security guy who's spent my career doing this, it's do or die on the border. Either we're going to have a law and order president or we don't. So there's your stage. That's the situation. I had one more point. When illegal immigration increases, human trafficking increases because they use the same modes of transportation. They use the same methods of smuggling people into the United States.
Well, Tom Homan, I knew you would not disappoint in framing the issue for us, and we'll of course let you make the political comments that you will. We will stick with a 501c3 friendly message. about human trafficking, which is not a way to complain about whatever's on your heart. You of course, are free to say that. Nikki, Pressley, I want to bring you into this conversation and pick up on one of the many excellent points that Tom made. And we'll get back to some of the others he did, but we really want to focus on human trafficking here in your comments, and take that same mentality of kind of the 30,000 foot view, but on human trafficking specifically, because we have some audience members out there who are concerned about immigration. They're concerned about illegal immigration. They know, because they hear a little bit about human trafficking, that it's an issue, but explain to them what it is and even the mechanisms that human traffickers use to get people here against their will.
Right. So I kind of want to piggyback off of what Tom was saying about the vulnerabilities that the border crisis kind of provides. And human trafficking is whenever an individual or a group forces someone against their will or against their knowledge through coercion or manipulation to perform labor services or commercial sex acts, but it's for that abuser's own financial gain. And it can look like a lot of different things. It can be prostitution or online exploitation, but also peddling and begging and forced labor in construction or agriculture, oftentimes is what we see. It's really complex, and it doesn't always look like what you would typically see in a fictional movie, such as like Taken, where a young girl is kidnapped and trafficked. That does happen, but more often it's a combination of vulnerabilities that the traffickers prey on and exploit. So those vulnerabilities could be some things such as migration, it could be foster care, juvenile justice involvement, a lack of strong familial or social supports, and drug dependencies, something that Tom kind of touched on. So for instance, if someone has a drug dependency, that trafficker will provide the drugs, but then exploit them and coerce them into doing acts that will benefit them financially. Or for minors, a lot of the time, it's a romantic partner that gains a child's love and trust, but then once again, manipulates them into an illicit industry.
Well, and I thanks for that explanation, Nikki. And I think sort of connecting the dots between what Tom is saying and what you're saying is that when we see the border not be controlled, when we allow the southern border with Mexico to be porous, as you and Tom have suggested, there is rather logically an increase in the amount of human trafficking. And so thanks for that context. Ken Oliver, I want to come to you next to sort of complete the connection of those dots. What proportion overall of trafficking victims in the United States are illegal immigrants?
We know it's too many, it's too high. It's could be very close to majority, and it depends what, like labor trafficking, for example. As Tom has mentioned in his book, which came out earlier this year, Defend the Border and Save Lives, the fact is that people pay thousands of dollars to smugglers to get into the country, and that debt bondage becomes makes them vulnerable to human trafficking. Then they have to work off that debt, and they we hear a lot about the sexual trafficking, but really the labor trafficking is where a lot of the migrant labor is vulnerable. High percentages are involved in it. So illegal immigration, by definition, the lawlessness really, and the sanctuary cities, as Tom also talked about, that just allows more and more of that to happen when you don't have the cooperation between federal and local law enforcement.
Yeah, okay. So, and Tom, I'm gonna get to you in just a minute. I just want to ask Nikki a follow-up question. And that is, Nikki, to maybe put some specificity, if you can, on the numbers of people here in the United States, generally, and Texas specifically, numbers of people who we think have been trafficked. I know that this can be a little elusive from a research standpoint, but I want to give our audience a sense of perspective here in terms of how large this problem is.
Right. I agree. I think that is very important. Last year, the National Human Trafficking Hotline identified over 22,000 victims in the United States, and then over 2,400 victims in Texas specifically. And that was just in 2019. And those are just among the victims identified. So a University of Texas study estimates that it's more likely that there's around 300,000 victims in Texas at any given moment that are being human trafficked, whether that be labor or sex trafficked, and about 79,000 of them are children being sex trafficked in Texas. And obviously those are just estimates. It could be more, it could be less, but it's really hard to tell just because of the nature of the issue.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know from some research we've done here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, we tend to be most comfortable with those estimates that range between the low number you mentioned and the high number. And that's a huge range just in Texas, a few thousand people to 300,000 people out of a population of nearly 30 million. There could be several thousand people being trafficked just in Houston alone. And that's part of the problem in looking at this from a public policy perspective and how to fix it, is that this is a very elusive problem because the people who are in it are obviously not going to be reporting the crimes that they're committing. And obviously the victims are perhaps the most powerless victims of any crime in the United States. So Tom, I want to go upstream if we can, and maybe take a look at Mexico specifically. What are the reasons that are in Mexico that are exacerbating this problem of human trafficking in the United States? Is it the cartels? Is it a lack of control by the government? Any other factors that are contributing to human trafficking in the United States? Looks like you're on mute, Tom.
Good call.
We've got you back.
There you go. Well, it depends what border we're looking at, right? In the southern border, cartels control everything. Nothing happens on the northern border of Mexico with the cartels' blessing and approval. When all these family units are coming across, the cartels make a decision to send 200 family units in this sector, tie the border to assets up so this sector is clear. We're going to run our trafficking victims and our bad guys and our drugs through this unguarded place. So the cartels control a lot of the human trafficking and the gangs. Especially the northern border, it's outlaw motorcycle gangs, East Indian organized crime, and Asian organized crime control a lot of trafficking coming out of Canada. But the cartels control everything. And I want to put, I hear all the talk for the audience. I want to put a black and white picture together for you, what this looks like on the ground. When I was a special agent in Dallas, Texas, we shut down 15 massage parlors. We went to the massage parlors, all Asian massage parlors. Every one of those ladies there didn't have a passport, didn't have any identifying documents, didn't have any possessions other than their clothes because everything was locked up by the owner of the massage parlor in the safe. They were locked in that facility 24/7. They weren't free to leave. They were forced into sexual acts to pay off smuggling fees. That's what it looks like. When I did an operation in San Francisco, we hit a bunch of Chinese restaurants. We had Chinese illegal immigrants. It cost as much as $30,000 to $40,000 to be smuggled from China to the mainland, here to the United States. And they're paying those smuggling fees off forever, especially when they're getting paid $1 a day. So, and we hit these restaurants, and here you have illegal Chinese immigrants living in the basement of a restaurant. Again, the lock's on the outside the door, not on the inside. This puts a real picture on what this human trafficking looks like. So it's sexual exploitation, it's peonage, it's forced labor, it's all of that. And these people are truly victims of these crimes. So I wanted to say that because I wanted your viewers to get, okay, what does this look like? That's what it's looked like. That's MS-13 moves Hispanic young girls between the ages of 12 and 15 state to state to put in a hotel room and advertise on Craigslist or one of these other sites to earn money doing sexual acts. Happens thousands of times a day across this country. So that's what's happening. That's the seriousness of what's going on here.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective, Tom. So Ken, just one more perspective question before we delve a little more deeply into some other aspects of this. Is this problem of human trafficking getting better, or is it getting worse?
There's some indications that it's getting better in terms of there's much more awareness now. Many more organizations are working on it, law enforcement at the state and federal level. We've seen the Trump administration do a tremendous amount, the Attorney General. There's a lot more resources going into fighting and awareness. So a lot of awareness and prevention. One problem with the pandemic is that there's been some indications that it's gotten worse in terms of actual cases. We saw a 20% increase in cases by the National Trafficking Hotline last year. So the latest data we have. But I think there's some anecdotal information based on the pandemic that is concerning. Certainly it's getting better in terms of the enforcement and efforts being made to fight it. But we certainly have a long way to go.
And I'm sure, Ken, that members of our audience might want to ask some follow-up questions, which reminds me, if you're in the audience and you have a question for us here in just a few moments, we'll start taking your questions. So just type that into the comment section or whatever social media channel you're on, and we'll be sure and take as many of those as we can. Nikki, back to you. You've spent a lot of your time as a researcher, public policy analyst, and looking at the child welfare system, and you referenced that briefly in one of your comments earlier. How does the child welfare system in Texas, other states, and the United States generally play a part in this issue?
So the child welfare system, it really starts at the initial breakdown of the family system and the lack of robust social support systems. So whenever a child is experiencing that and then they enter foster care, once they enter care, that's even further trauma and further instability, which just increases those vulnerabilities that I was speaking on previously, where the traffickers can then go in and basically exploit their vulnerabilities. And once a child is in care, a lot of times they're not in their home community, they're not with their siblings, so their family structure, as I mentioned, is no longer there. They'll go from placement to placement, so it's really hard for them to create healthy attachments and good mentors and good peers. And so basically the child welfare system is just an increased vulnerability because they're experiencing all of those different types of traumas and instabilities. But Texas is kind of in a unique situation because we are moving towards a community-based care model, which is essentially putting making our communities take ownership over our kids. And we've seen a lot of better outcomes through those models where the kids are staying in their home communities more, not having as many placements, they're staying with their siblings. So essentially it's creating a way to promote stability and then kind of lowering the chance and the risk of those vulnerabilities and that exploitation.
So thank you. It seems to me, if I were just putting what you said into layman's terms, because you're the expert, I would say that if we want to minimize the vulnerabilities among young people which are leading to the potential for them being human trafficked, it would be developing in our child welfare system a greater ownership by local communities in the problem of the breakdown of the family. In other words, we contrast that, and Texas is making some progress there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Florida sort of leads the country when it comes to that community-based care model. Contrast that with what the situation in Texas has been and is in most states, where that child welfare system, the foster care system, is hyper-centralized in the state capital, hyper-centralized in government. And we don't even have to question intentions there of the people who are working, the state employees, but we also know the efficiency that comes from that level of centralization. In other words, we need as a civil society to really embrace the duties we have to one another, especially the vulnerable people, to help prevent this problem. That's connected, of course, Ken Oliver, to government doing its job in another respect, which is protecting the border. And you've played a leading role, as has Tom, in putting together groups of people and organizations around the country to emphasize the importance of border security. Once again, tie together for us the problem of human trafficking with the problem of a lack of border security, and maybe look into your crystal ball and tell us what you think the future may hold, either under a second Trump term or a Joe Biden presidency.
No, Kevin, the fight against human trafficking should be really bipartisan. It has in the past. You would hope that that will be the case. Really, who can be in favor of a system of immigration where you have the amount of human trafficking that we have? It is a concern. We definitely need to see improvements in border security, such as DNA testing, more biometrics of everybody, including minors. This has just recently started under the Trump administration, the Guardians. We know that DHS back in 2019, fairly recently, was finding fake families, there was not a genetic relationship between these unaccompanied minors and their guardians or supposed parents. So biometrics using technology, 100% inspection at the ports of entry. We know just recently we were hearing at our Border Security Coalition meeting last week, which Tom was part of. We have over 20 people from around the country who are leaders on border security. We were talking with the Border Patrol Deputy Chief about the fact of the amount of tractor trailers with people coming in. We don't have 100% inspection right now. So tractor trailers come in with people all the time, undetected. We need to get 100% inspection without affecting our trade and without slowing down significantly our trade. But the technology has to be improved. The wall system between the ports of entry is helping to deter trafficking. And another concern that Tom didn't mention, but that I believe is in the plan on immigration, is to stop worksite enforcement. Well, worksite enforcement is precisely where you're going to find a lot of the labor trafficking violations.
Thanks for that, Ken. So I'll ask one more question, and it's going to come your way, Tom, and then we'll get to audience questions. So once again, if you're in the audience and have a question for any or all of our panelists, now would be the time to type that into the comments box. So correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, just being the political observer that I am, two things. The first is it's been seemingly impossible in the United States to get to some sort of immigration reform consensus on illegal immigration, what to do about it. It's become hyper politicized, in other words. It seems to me, just from the standpoint of being an observer, that more honest focus on the extent of the problem of human trafficking might be a really important and helpful way to get to that consensus on what to do about illegal immigration.
Well, yeah, I'll agree with you that I'm not looking for, look, I got no hope that Congress is going to solve these problems. We're not going to close the loopholes. I think they want this to be a political fight. I've said it the last time I testified, we turned into an S show, is what, you know, you guys have failed American people for 30 years. And when if you want to know why women are 31% of women are being sexually assaulted, making that journey through the illicit pathways, why there's human trafficking victims all across this country, why are children dying across this border, why are cartels making millions of dollars every day? It's because they have failed to do their job, secure our southern border. Securing the southern border saves lives. Securing the southern border saves victims of trafficking. There's no downside on secured borders. No downside unless deaths. There's no downside unless rapes of females coming up to that pathway. There's no downside unless trafficking victims. There's no downside unless illegal drugs. There's no downside. So whether you're Republican or Democrat, or independent, we would all should want a secure border. And so that's the frustration I have. Like at least last couple times I testified, I lost my temper because they want to vilify the men and women who enforce these laws, but they wrote these laws and they're failing the American people. So yes, human trafficking, making this a top story across this country will help push some to say, okay, well, we got to address it. But I actually, my 35 years, I think there's a lot of people who don't want to solve the immigration problem. Even some Republicans, they want cheap illegal labor. And that's a fact. And I just want to follow up with one comment made. You're right. One of the other things that of future presidency, that the presidency change would be less worksite enforcement, which is where we identify a vast majority of victims of trafficking, at least with ICE. That's what we found most of them. And I think what we also have to do is not really wait on Congress to do anything. We got to keep doing what we're doing with programs like we have today and things that Nikki's working on. We got to educate the American people. ICE out there talking to airline pilots and flight attendants. Here's what you look for. Here are the signs. You know, you see something, say something. They meet with hotel chains. Here's what you should look for when someone rents a room and things that may lead to human trafficking. So we got to continue to educate the American public. That's why things like you're doing today, this thing today is great. We got to keep that up. I have zero faith in Congress. And so we got to educate the American people who believe in law and order, and they see something, say something, so we can save these women and children from a terrible, terrible thing.
Well, I'm glad you said what you did about what we can do to help address this problem. And I'll come back to that at the end of our conversation, because we always want to give our audience members a sense of the role they can play and addressing the problem we've identified. And if I were writing another headline here, it would be that it's not inhumane to have border security. In fact, it's inhumane to fail to have border security, not just for people who are being trafficked here, but also for the illegal immigrants themselves. And it's crucial for us as a people, as a civilization, to realize that honoring our rule of law is also a way of honoring human dignity. That's why the Texas Public Policy Foundation, our friend Tom Homan and others are so adamantly focused on border security. That's actually a way of honoring those things, rule of law and dignity.
Well, if I could, one more thing.
Sure.
Is beyond the forced labor and the sex acts and so forth is illegal immigration, illegal immigrant employment. No one hires an illegal immigrant out of goodness of their heart. Let's just face the facts. They hire them because they're going to work them harder, they're going to pay them less, and they're going to undercut their competition. So even for those who may not be victims of trafficking, they're being smuggled in the U.S. They're going to work under the table, being paid less with no health coverage, no retirement benefits. They're going to work very hard. And if they complain, the owner's going to call ICE. He'll make and I've seen it so many times. You know, the day before payday, we get a call, we get a tip. There's illegal aliens working over here. So we go arrest 30 of them a day before payday. So it goes beyond just, you know, the human trafficking aspects. It goes even deeper that may not be servitude, it may not be peonage, but they're being taken advantage of, and no one should be okay with that.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and it's a very nonpartisan comment, Tom, that you make there, and then for that matter, that exemplifies our foundation's stance on this. That the origins of this problem lie with both Democrats and Republicans, and if we're going to start fixing this problem, it's going to require some courage on behalf of each of us. So let's involve our audience. There's some great questions that are already in the queue. I'll read the first one, and really any of the three of you, maybe all three of you want to take a crack at this. I'll pitch it first to Nikki. This audience member, Nikki, asks, are there organizations that may have access or insight into cases that are not being reported? This audience member specifically references a news story they saw that Planned Parenthood has been alleged to not report cases of human trafficking.
That's a good question. If they're not reporting it, then it's kind of difficult for me to say. I would say I think that a lot of organizations are probably aware or have their suspicions, especially nonprofits that maybe work for or work with homeless populations, the child welfare system, foster care, maybe domestic violence, stuff like that. I think that there's probably a lot of nonprofits that have their suspicions about victims or cases, but maybe the victim will not come forward and actually relay that they are being victimized. Or it could also be doctors' offices, dentists. A lot of victims in the research that I've read, we're going to the doctor and we're doing all of those things, but they just never explicitly stated that they were needed help and were unsafe. So
okay, well, thank you for that. Ken, Tom, any insight you have into some organizations purposely not reporting?
Well, let me just add this real quick. If people aren't reporting because they're afraid, well, ICE is going to, you know, go take enforcement action against the victim, let me make people aware. If there's a victim of crime or a victim of trafficking, ICE is going to help them get a visa. There are a certain number of visas that are eligible, that are available to victims of trafficking. We want the bad guy. And I spent a lot of time testifying on Hill. We just want access to the bad guy. You give us a bad guy. We have victim witness coordinators. I think ICE has over 300 of them now that are trained to deal with victims of trafficking and sexual abuse. And they'll work with them. They'll get them the counseling they need. They'll make them part of the Victims of Immigrant Crime Voice Office. They'll get updates when that person, whoever abused them, gets arrested, when they're going to jail, where they're going to jail, when they get out, when they have to testify. We go step by step with that victim, not only to get them the help they need, the mental therapy they need, but to get them the immigration benefits that they deserve, because there are visas available to victims. So no one should be afraid that reporting trafficking to ICE is going to benefit the victim, and we're going to hold the bad guy accountable. That's what it is.
Yeah, it goes back to the rule of law. I mean, not only do the government and law enforcement officers, whether they be federal agents or local officers, have an obligation to do their jobs, but we as other citizens do as well, right? So if we see a problem, we need to report it. And we'll come back to that issue toward the end, as I mentioned, because I want to give our audience members a series of practical steps that each of us can take to help address this problem. Before we do that though, Ken, I want to come to you with this next question. Tom already addressed part of this in his opening comment. Of course, Tom, we welcome your further thoughts on this too, but we'll start with Ken. This audience member asks, would you consider the Trump administration's response to human trafficking successful? Where has it fallen short and what is next?
There's been a real increase in attention to human trafficking by the Trump administration at the highest level. For the first time, there's a White House coordinator on this issue in the Domestic Policy Council. Attorney General Barr has been very involved. There's been, again, significant progress in funding throughout the states. Texas now has received funding for a coordinating task force that the Attorney General is leading. And this is just in recent years under the Trump administration. So I think that will continue if the president is reelected. And as I said earlier, we hope that this is a bipartisan issue that everyone can agree on. If we focus on the fight against human trafficking, we should be able to do a lot of the right things that need to be done on stopping illegal immigration, knowing who's coming into our country, and getting aligning our legitimate labor needs with our immigration system, so we don't have this under the table, off the book system, which really promotes human trafficking and exploitation. As Tom said, we have thousands of visas. They're called T and U visas that we haven't reached our caps. I mean, each year there are visas available for people who are suffering and victims of human trafficking. If they cooperate with law enforcement, they can qualify for one of these visas and help us shut down the traffickers.
Thanks, Ken. Tom, just a quick follow-up for you about that. You spoke about the problems as you see it if former Vice President Biden wins next month's election. What if there is a second Trump term? What do you expect from the administration when it comes to their fight on human trafficking? Do you think that the efforts will be at the same level? Do you see new initiatives? Have you heard about new initiatives that we might expect if in fact there's a second term?
I think the Trump administration has got a lot of progress on human trafficking, creating the task forces. The DHS has pushed out the blue campaign. And look, just the fact that illegal immigration is down 80%, I want to say it again. Doctors Without Borders did their own study of females that are smuggled through the illicit pathways coming up Central America to the US. And their own numbers show 31% of all women that come through that pathway get sexually assaulted. So, and again, since President Trump has that immigration down to the level that we haven't seen in a long time, less people are being trafficked. Why? Because there's less illegal immigration, first of all. And second of all, now that Border Patrol is more vigilant, if you notice in the news, there's a lot more drugs being captured right now because Border Patrol is vigilant. They're on the line. They're doing their job. Instead of 50% being off the line dealing with a humanitarian crisis, they're doing the job. So President Trump securing the border as much as he's done so far has already had a great impact on human trafficking. What needs to be done, do I think Joe Biden is going to do what he should do for human trafficking? I gotta hope so, and I think he will. I think he's a decent man. But it's really Congress, right? So people watching it, call your congressman, call your senator, find out what they're doing about human trafficking, because the Congress writes the checks. They're going to write the checks to the state, giving them funding. They're going to say how many visas are going to be available for victims of trafficking. Congress needs to step up, and that's what we need to hold accountable, even more than the president. The people that write the laws, they can make human trafficking a more serious crime. They can give additional funding to police departments and to community organizations to help people through this crisis. That's who we need to really take action on, is Congress, not so much the president, who I think has done a good job.
Good, thanks, Tom. So Nikki, I'll pitch to you another question from a different audience member. And this is one of those questions that looks at this problem from the sidewalk level. And this audience member asks, what protection is offered to victims of human trafficking once they have arrived here and are discovered and obviously freed from the situation they're in?
Right. So similar to what Tom and Ken have been talking about is the T visas and the V visas. I think that there's a lack of kind of promotion of those. I think that a lot of people don't know that those exist. Kind of like the last question you were saying, people aren't reporting, and Tom was saying they need to be reporting because there are protections available. Once they've migrated, and if they come forward with their victimization and they cooperate with law enforcement, they will have protections and they can actually gain citizenship after a while. Citizenship not only for themselves, but for their family as well.
Good. That's helpful. So we're getting near to the end of our time, and we'll of course give our audience a couple more minutes to pose some questions if they have them. But that's, if you're in the audience, that's your cue that you're getting down to the end. I want to ask each of you at least one more question before the final question, which is to give us some hopefulness about 2020. And that is, if you had a magic wand to solve this problem, I'm going to pitch to each of you. If you had a magic wand to solve this problem and you could do one thing to solve human trafficking, what would it be? Ken, we'll start with you.
Well, we, as you know, we've had several reports with a key recommendation regarding the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 and its amendments, which is to eliminate the distinction between unaccompanied minors from Mexico and Canada and those from Central America and elsewhere. Currently, these minors from Mexico and Canada are screened for human trafficking. If they're not victims of human trafficking, they're sent back to their home country. In the case of the other countries that are not contiguous to the U.S., these minors are kept by the U.S. government, by Health and Human Services, and you have this, it triggers the whole incentive to bring in minors from Central America because they know they're going to be released into the country after a certain amount of days. So we really need to amend the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Congress needs to do that. That would be the one big improvement we could achieve, and that's certainly viable.
Sure, and that's the kind of thing that's so common sense. There ought to be bipartisan support, right?
Yes, and we actually, we have a bipartisan bill on that between John Cornyn and Henry Cuellar. It just hasn't been acted on.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Nikki, magic wand question: if there's one thing you could do to change, what would it be?
Well, I think whenever you really get down to the bottom of it, like I was kind of saying before, it really starts with communities taking ownership. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have healthy families and healthy communities and healthy social support systems. Because without that, then these vulnerabilities start building up, and then that's whenever they become exploited. And there is a demand, and that's exactly why people are exploited. But I think that demand would go down if we continued to build up our communities, our social supports, and had healthy families. So I think that would be my one solution, is to continue taking ownership over our communities and not necessarily relying on government so much, but kind of taking accountability for our communities.
Yeah, I love the way you used your magic wand, Nikki, because using it that way would solve so many problems. If we're able to address the breakdown of the American family, we'd have better schools. We'd probably have a lot fewer lawsuits. We wouldn't have issues of people beating up police officers. Gosh, you really used that well. So an A+ for that. Tom Homan, what would you do with your magic wand?
Well, it's already been stolen. TVPRA was something I've been complaining to Congress about the last 3 years. They need to address it. The TVPRA had a great reasoning and great reasons why that was created, to protect victims of trafficking, but it's been exploited and used by the cartels to bring hundreds of thousands of children to this country, many with people claiming to be their parents, but not their parents. I would like to see, as part of the TVPR change, I'd like to see everybody fingerprinted. Under the age of 14, they don't, DHS don't like fingerprint, but if you're 8 years, look, I have my child fingerprinted, was in kindergarten. In case anything ever happened to him, I had his fingerprints. Everybody should be fingerprinted coming across the border. So if a child comes across the border again with a different person claiming to be the family, we know that he's being rented over and over again by the cartels. There's been hundreds and thousands of cases where kids have come across that border a dozen times with different family members because that was her ticket to get released from the U.S. Finally, I'll say this. I would like to see the federal government put up the national database that all law enforcement, state, local, and feds could use as one place, a one-stop, where all the intelligence on trafficking can be found. even after 9/11, they said we got to stop the stovepipes of trading intelligence and information between law enforcement agencies. It's still happening. We got the FBI doing trafficking cases, ICE doing trafficking cases, you got the marshals doing trafficking cases. But unless you're part of a regional task force, a local task force, there's no place, one central repository for intelligence, whether it's from local law enforcement or the community or border officers that may see something suspicious. I wish we come up with something like that so there's one-stop shopping for any intelligence on that. So there's three things. I know you said one, but since he stole my PVPRA, I had to come up with two other ones. So there you go.
I had no doubt whatsoever, my friend, you were not going to limit yourself to one. If Tom Homan gets a magic wand, I expect him to use it well, and you did. Yeah. So a couple of our audience members are pleading with me to squeeze in a couple of more of their questions. So we'll do that, and I'll get to my last question. Ken, this one will go to you. This audience member asks, are there any programs like job training available to the population of formerly trafficked people who are now free?
You know, Nikki may have more information on that one. I believe that's the case, that there are, as we talked about the visas, there's an effort to integrate people who are suffering or victims of human trafficking once they come forward and are working with law enforcement to be able to stay in the country and integrate with jobs. I don't know if Nikki has any more information on that.
Yeah, most of the human trafficking nonprofits that are specifically for survivors, they have wraparound services. So it's not just going to be a residential treatment center where they can, or a shelter. Most of the time it's going to be a shelter plus job training, mental health services, or just general medical services. The Trump administration actually just gave grants to 2 nonprofits in Texas. I cannot remember their names right now, I'm sorry, but essentially to expand their services and to do more job training, more residential treatment, all of those types of things. So yes, most nonprofits that are working with survivors do offer job trainings and wraparound services.
Good. So there's one more audience question that we'll pose, and I'll pitch it to you, Tom. Each of you has answered this in bits and pieces, and those answers have been really good. But I just want to give our audience members a real pithy list of things that they can do to help. And so this audience member asks, I'm a mom and grandma and have work experience working with preschool age children. What can I do to get involved? Tom, you want to field that one?
Yeah, you know, a couple of things. Number one, as Nikki just said, there's a lot of organizations in the local community that need your help. Not only financial help, they need your volunteer help. Our victim witness coordinators at ICE, if you want to help ICE and with that program, please contact ICE, reach out to the ombudsman, tell me you want to get involved. You may be involved with a victim witness coordinator, or the victim witness coordinator may put you in touch with a local NGO that helps these groups. So your volunteer work, your money's important. Of course, your donations are always important to these NGOs, but your volunteer time, I would say, is equally important, if not more important. And I'll tell you something, it's a difficult thing when you think about volunteering for this. I'm a pretty tough guy. I've done this for 35 years. The reason I get emotional, angry many times, because if people see what I've seen in my 35 years, they don't understand why I get emotional, angry. There's terrible things out there in our world, and you can help by volunteering, but be prepared, because it's tragic. But they need you. They need your understanding, need your compassion, they need your assistance. So reach out to your local communities. There's a lot of organizations. Maybe Nikki can send out, email to the people participating on the various organizations that are involved. Volunteer. They need it. They need probably your volunteer hours more than they need your money, but they probably could use both.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Tom. And just to follow up with that homework assignment you gave us, Nikki and our other wonderful colleagues here at TPPF will put that in the comment section of at least the Facebook feed. We'll get that out to you. If you're interested in more information, we can also give you a call and send you an email. So just let us know via that comment section. So the last question is one that I always try to carve out time for. And we started with the 30,000 foot view. We got into the details of this conversation, and y'all have done a great job of giving us really helpful information, diagnosing this difficult problem realistically, as well as something I'm really proud of, giving us some solutions to work on. But because it's a heavy topic, And because 2020 is a heavy year, so to speak, we always try to have our guests conclude with something optimistic, some reason to wake up tomorrow and be proud to be an American, something to look forward to. And so I'll ask each of you to respond to that however you would like. And Ken Oliver, will start with you.
Well, I really do feel like at Texas Public Policy Foundation, we identified the fight against human trafficking as something we can all agree on, the modern slavery of our time. It's happening in our country at a tremendous level. It's happening in Texas, the second worst level of human trafficking in the country, behind California. So we want to build that consensus that we need to focus on ending human trafficking. We can do it on a bipartisan basis. It's been done before. When cooler heads prevail, hopefully after the election, we will see continued progress on the executive end and in Congress as well. There's no reason that cannot happen. Texas is leading to push for that here in Washington. And we have many allies, including on both sides of the aisle.
Thank you. Nikki, here's your shot at some optimistic message for all of us.
Well, I am very optimistic about this, but I think while we are identifying more victims, which is disheartening and we don't want to see more victims, I think it's optimistic that we are identifying them and we are uncovering them and people are coming forward and we're able to help them and able to get them the services and the programs that they need. And I think in Texas, actually, we're doing a lot in this fight. I think that we have identified our problem and we're starting to take accountability for our actions. And we're really building a lot of really good strategic partnerships and collaboration between not only DFPS or the juvenile justice system, but our nonprofits are collaborating really well. So I am really hopeful. And I think that our communities are starting to wake up a little bit to our issue in Texas. So I am hopeful.
I appreciate that hopefulness. Tom Homan, last word.
I'm optimistic about where we are with this issue of human trafficking. I talked to you about the operation I did in Dallas with the massage parlors and the Chinese restaurants. Back then, no one knew anything about human trafficking. No one was talking about it. We're on it. ICE is on it. I joined this conference today when I saw human trafficking. I know how important it is. Everybody's talking about it. I appreciate this organization being on top of it and educating the American people. What I'm optimistic about is now it's out there. A lot of people are talking about it. This foundation is talking about it. We got Nikki out there pushing information out. I just think it's in my 34, 35-year career, it's on top of the pile. It's never been on top of the pile, and now it is. And everybody's talking about it, and I agree with Nikki, because of the attention being focused on this, we're going to save a lot of lives. And we're going to save a lot of victims of trafficking that otherwise wouldn't have been saved back in the 90s when I did these investigations. I think now the American people are aware of this issue. We're going to keep educating them, and we're going to save many more people than we ever have in the past.
Well, to Tom Homan, Nikki Pressley, Ken Oliver, thank you so much for an excellent conversation, for giving us some optimism, giving us some specific solutions, not just on the policy front, but also on the individual front. Obviously, each of us needs to be more aware of situations that seem suspicious. And now with the information you've given us, perhaps we can be even more effective in doing so. I'm also grateful because it's obvious that this is a problem that is neither a Democrat nor a Republican problem. If anything, both sides are to blame. If we're looking to blame for the origins of it, that means that both sides can play a part in solving it. And I'm hopeful on behalf of all of us at the Texas Public Policy Foundation that regardless of which candidate wins the presidential election, that because this is not just a Democrat problem or just a Republican problem, that we will join forces and try to solve it. Lord knows the victims of this, the hundreds of thousands of victims of human trafficking, the modern slavery of our time, demand that kind of working together. And maybe, just maybe, if we begin to solve this problem of human trafficking, we can begin attacking other pressing public policy problems like border security and illegal immigration generally in ways that are best for America, not merely best for one political party or another. I think Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska this morning said it well in the hearings of Judge Barrett to be confirmed to the Supreme Court. And to paraphrase him, it was to stop seeing things like a judicial confirmation through the lens of liberal or conservative, but to see it through the lens as an American. And if there is any issue among all of our pressing issues that demands that kind of attention, it would be this one, human trafficking. So once again, to our guests, thank you for a job well done. To our audience, thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to solving this problem with you. God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States. Take care.